Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's version of DevOps Derek Weekly. I'm DevOps Derek, or commonly referred to as Derek Campbell. And today I have Shabaz on with me. Hey, Shabaz, how are you today?
Hi, Derek. I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. The sun is not shining in Scotland, but that doesn't exactly make up. There's no great difference there. But yeah, it's no, it's good. I'm just outside of Glasgow. Whereabouts are you based, Shabazz?
So I'm based in West Yorkshire, Bradford to be exact. So born and bred in Bradford. So I'm just kind of on the outskirts, quite close to the motorway. So yeah.
Excellent, excellent. So, tell us a little bit about yourself. Throw in some personal bits and the professional
Yeah.
aspect as well.
Oh, thank you. So yeah, Shabaz Dar, 36 years old. Like I said, born and bred in Bradford. I'm currently a consultant working for a medium-sized MSP. But as some people who follow me on Twitter might be aware, I'm moving jobs soon, a couple of weeks. I'm going to move into a net company, a Danish company based in Leeds as a senior infrastructure consultant. So I've been doing Azure for about four years now. From a consultancy perspective, doing a lot of infrastructure especially, and that's my main focus really, from an Azure perspective, the infrastructure as a service. And doing some of the platform stuff as well, but mainly around the compute and done a lot of Windows Virtual Desktop recently. Identity management is a massive part of that, which is hopefully what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, awesome. Well, congratulations on the new role.
Thank you, appreciate
Nice
that.
to get a new shiny job.
Yeah.
Their company are pretty big as well. Yeah.
They are, yes. I think they're a Danish company, but they're based in Leeds, London, and Derby. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. It's going to be quite different for me because, like I said, I'm used to small to medium businesses. So this is something that I feel is going to like another level, more enterprise level. And I'm just really looking forward to working on bigger scale projects, really. So yeah.
Awesome. And I'm guessing as well, one of those bigger projects is going to involve a lot of what we're going to talk about today, which is Azure Active Directory Hybrid and Azure Active Directory Domain Services. Is that correct?
It is, yeah. So a lot of the work I've done previously as well, the identity management, if we say in Azure, is kind of the bedrock of all the sort of projects I've done in different ways as well. So as I said, which is showing how I did a blog post based on it. I've got a lot of examples where I've used all three of these. So yeah, today, I'm just going to talk a bit about each one. And just explain how I've used them in a more kind of real world scenario.
Awesome. So let's pretend someone doesn't know what Azure Active Directory is. Share a little bit about what it is, and then for the people that maybe your traditional operations people, where they're used to Azure Active Directory, how does it stack and compare with the on-premises version?
Okay, so for those who don't know, Azure Active Directory is the cloud identity management used for a lot of the software as a service part of Microsoft. So Office 365, SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, they all use an Azure Active Directory object, so to speak, a user account for their authentication. So it's a cloud. Azure Active Directory is cloud only, so there's no in its default form. There's no on-premises integration. There's no hybrid aspect to it. It's just cloud only, so you can use it to integrate with other third-party apps that are cloud-based as well, like other maybe HR or payroll or anything like that that's kind of cloud-based using SAML. You can do all sorts of single sign-on with it, but again, it's all based around cloud applications and the identity management for cloud only. And to answer your second question, sorry. So for your on-premises Active Directory and the differences between that, your on-premises Active Directory is Kerberos and NTLM authentication based, whereas Azure Active Directory is password hash. So it doesn't have that kind of same level of authentication as on-premises. So whereas an on-premises, using our on-premises Active Directory, for example, you could join a Windows machine to that domain. With Azure AD, you can't join VMs on-premises or in the cloud in Azure. You can't join them to that domain. It's not got that Kerberos and NTLM authentication aspect to it. So it's password hash only.
Yep. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I hear you fine. Okay. There we go. Yep, so carry on. I'm just going to fix this green screen.
No problem. Yeah, so that's probably the most obvious difference between Active Directory on premises and Azure AD. Obviously, Active Directory comes with other aspects to it, like you've got the group policy element. Now, Azure AD is probably the closest thing to that in Azure with Azure AD is probably Intune, and that's where you've got the policy. It's equivalent of policy management, but you've got compliance policies and configuration policies, which again aren't a direct replacement to group policy, but they're probably from a cloud only perspective, they're probably the closest you get to on-premises group policy, where you can deploy policies to cloud managed devices that are authenticating with Azure AD.
Right. So you can. There are ways to manage computers as well as those user objects.
There is, exactly. The standard or typical on-premises OU hierarchy isn't there. It's all just one big list or one OU, so to speak. But to be able to manage devices, you essentially enroll them into Azure AD, and you can do that using Intune, or you can join them to the Azure AD domain, so to speak. And again, it's not joining them in a traditional sense as you do with on-premises Windows. You're enrolling the devices into Azure AD, and then you can manage the devices through that and do your standard MDM sort of stuff where you can lock devices, wipe devices. But again, the identity management part of that is Azure AD, which is the cloud-based only identity management.
Awesome. And the good thing is as well with Azure Active Directory is you can actually also you can also add in your phones as well, whereas traditionally you weren't able to do that.
100%, yeah. So with Azure AD and with addition to that Intune, you've got several different device types you can join to it. Obviously, Windows being one of them. Windows 10 it's based around that. But you've also got the iOS capability, which is obviously iPhones and iPads. It's also got Android support. So Android devices, you can enroll into Azure AD and Intune. And then again, using the sort of MDM sort of capabilities, manage those, deploy applications to those, MFA, all that sort of stuff. They can all be enabled with those features. And again, the bedrock of it is Azure AD. That's where it all starts. So all these other things like Intune and being able to enroll devices into Azure AD, they're all Azure AD is where it starts. That's the identity management. Without that, you can't have these other capabilities in the cloud.
Excellent. And you can use identity management as well with your SQL, your Azure SQL servers, your VMs as well, can't you?
From an application perspective, yeah. So you could use the Azure AD accounts to have integration with the applications, but not from the Windows, the Windows element of it. Like I said, you can't join machines to the Azure AD domain. But as far as applications go, yes, you can have that integration with Azure AD for different types of integration. Unfortunately, I'm not an applications guy, so I don't know much about the sort of the SQL element of it or the other applications. But that there is, again, that aspect where you can integrate Azure AD with other applications. Yeah, definitely.
So yeah, so obviously we've covered Azure Active Directory. That's, you can provision, you can come into, obviously, let's have a quick look at this portal, and then obviously log in. I've got it's funny, I actually have my own Active Directory tenant. I use it a lot when, I use it a lot actually for Azure Active Directory with Octopus Deploy. So I don't mind showing this a little bit of this. This is not my work account, thankfully. I think our security team. But yeah, you can have things like your emails. I actually have Derek Campbell Dev, and I won't lie, I've got more domains than I care to admit that I know what to do with. So yeah, and obviously there's certain licenses as well. So tell us a little bit about the licenses side of things. So obviously most of it's free.
Yeah, so there's for as far as the licensing goes, I think in my blog I named 4 different license tiers, but to most businesses and most users there's 3. So you've got the basic, which is what you get with most Office 365 accounts. When you create an Office 365 account, it automatically provisions a Azure Active Directory account. It's the free version of it. So again, that allows you to authenticate to Office 365, SharePoint, OneDrive, and use all those applications, those SaaS products essentially. If you want some of the more high-end security features, like MFA, conditional access, and stuff like that, that's where you need to go up a level. So you'd go to Azure Active Directory Premium 1 or P1, and that's where you get the additional security features that you just don't get with the free version. And then again, to go another level up, if you want the even more advanced features of stuff like identity protection, or PIM, I think we call it for short, you go to Azure AD P2. And so in my experience, you tend to see most businesses, especially the small to medium ones, around the P1 area, because it gives them a lot of the good features like the MFA conditional access, and the features and the additions to, like, being able to lock down devices and applications, and it's really hits that middle kind of tier. I'm hoping I'll see a lot more customers in my new job going to the P2, so I can start doing more with the identity protection, stuff like that. But yeah, those are the. Sorry, go on.
So with P2, is it P2 that has just-in-time access where you can you can make your, so you may have that traditionally, you would have, say, Derek.Campbell, right, at domain.local.
Yeah.
But you would also have, say, admin-Derek, right? That's how I do it in my. I've got 2 Active Direct. I've got 2 domain controls, and I've got one for work and one for. I know I go a little bit too far, from being honest. I've got like proper sort of my home server. They're on my home one. I've got different. I've got different networks. I got VNets and all sorts of stuff. I know I probably need to get out more, but
you can never go too far.
That's true. It's true. It's a good lab. It's a good home lab to have it set up like that. I've actually recently migrated everything over to my new Dell XPS, mostly because it's got 64 gig of RAM and i9, etc. So I've got my home lab. I've got like 9 virtual machines that go with me anywhere I go. Obviously, with COVID, I'm not going anywhere. But but yeah, so just-in-time access, just to explain that a little bit, is you have that user, you want to get admin access, and you can activate it for a period of time. So it could well be an hour, could be, I think it's 8 hours as well, and then you can so is it P2 that you can do that with?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure you actually need P2. I think it's you need the standard version of Azure Security Center.
Right.
And that's what it comes with. So you've got with Azure Security Center, bit of a tangent, but Azure Security Center, it comes with, you get the free version as default. But to get the just-in-time, right, you need the standard version of it. Right, the only reason I know that is because I'm studying for my AZ500 at the moment, and it's on there. I don't believe you need. I may be wrong. I don't believe you need P2, but you definitely need the standard version of Azure Security Center.
So, from a high level perspective, what does a P1 give that 3 doesn't, and then what does a P2 give that P1 doesn't?
Sorry, Derek, the signal went for 2 minutes there. Can you just repeat that question?
Yeah, no problem. So you have your free license, right? Then you
Yeah,
have your premium P1, then you
yeah,
have your premium P2.
yeah.
Out of interest, what does P1 have that Active Directory free and then P2 over P1? Is that something you could do off the top of your head?
Yeah, so so you're asking me the difference and what the
Yeah,
benefits is that?
yeah,
So yeah, so with, like I said, with the with P2, again, in my opinion, there's not that much difference, but the main feature between P1 and P2 that you get is the Azure identity protection management, which is PIM, I think they call it, and
yeah,
that's the biggest. What in my opinion, that's the biggest difference that you'll see, and that you'll probably find the most benefit from. I think there's a lot of little other differences that I don't know off the top of my head. I know, yeah, I think it says there you get the self-signing port and stuff like that as well, but I think you get that in P1 as well. The main, I think it's the password protection and stuff like that. Identity protection for me personally is the biggest difference between P1 and P2.
yeah, yeah. So you've got that. It's clear here that you've got your identity protection. So it's about that risk base. So you can say if user X is logged on with browser Y in this new location, suddenly
Yeah, yeah.
may have to go out. So obviously there's a way there. No,
And you've
that's
got different levels of risk as well. So I think you've got high, medium, and low. Um, and again, I think there's different. I can't remember the categories off the top of my head, but there are different categories of risk within those. So I think there's 1 or 2 high risk. There's like 6, 4, 5, 6 medium, and there's only like 1 low level risk.
right.
And it's all kind of managed through this identity protection.
Yeah. So the security team and the risk registrars, and they'll love all this stuff. No, that's
Exactly.
Thank you very much. So, one of the things obviously you're saying there, so obviously that's Azure Active Directory. It's purely cloud. So tell me a little bit about hybrid.
Yeah, sure. So this is what I have found is probably the most common identity management I've seen, especially recently with all the COVID stuff going on. Hybrid is best of both worlds, really. So you've got your Active Directory on premises. So you say you're a business who you've had the Active Directory on premises for years, and you integrate group policy quite a bit with your users and your devices, and you're not quite ready to move away from that. You'd kind of use this hybrid element. So what you do is you install a utility called Azure AD Connect on a domain controller, and you essentially sync your objects. Now, I use the phrase objects because that can be either can be user accounts, groups, security groups, devices. You essentially sync those to Azure AD, and that gives you hybrid identity management. Now, to go even further into it, there are 3 different types of synchronization you can do. You've got password hash synchronization. You've got what's the third one? You've got ADFS, and you've also got pass-through authentication, I believe. And again, these 3 different sort of synchronization options have different benefits and different use cases as well. The kind of the default one is your password hash synchronization. So it literally just syncs the account and the password. So if excuse me, for companies that are just using Office 365, maybe a bit of SharePoint here and there, they just want their users to have the same password as their on-premises network infrastructure, you kind of use password hash because you want it to have like a bit of a, you don't want them to have multiple passwords. It gives them that kind of more single sign-on feel. If you want to say, like I said, you've got sort of security policies on premises that you use as a business, and you want to keep on using those, even though you want to start using cloud like Office 365 and SharePoint, to allow those synced accounts to keep on using those security policies, you would use pass-through authentication. So again, it does the same sort of single sign-on feature as password hash synchronization, but with the added feature that you can also on-premises security policies as well, and you can still manage those hybrid accounts with those same policies. The final one is using ADFS. So this is quite an old feature, is ADFS. It's been around for years, but you can actually configure it and manage it through Azure AD Connect. This has probably got a bigger footprint than the other two synchronization options, because you need to have Windows ADFS servers and all that side of it. And again, this is for businesses that have even more they have applications on premises. So as well as security policies, they also have, they might have SQL apps on premises that they host, or other HR applications, or something like that, some sort of application that they want to utilize those hybrid accounts for. So this is where you'd use ADFS to do the kind of synchronization. So you can still utilize your cloud accounts or your hybrid accounts to do that application integration as well. And the applications are on premises, not in the cloud.
So ADFS is more like a hybrid on steroids, because you've got that synchronization, which I believe happens every hour. You can change that.
You can, yeah.
But yes, obviously, because the pass-through authentication is you're in the cloud, you're authenticating, and then you come back and you authenticate to the same user that's on premise. Yeah.
Yeah. So we've passed through an ADFS. Active Directory on premises is the source of the authentication still.
Yeah.
Whereas with password hash, it's either or. There's less reliance on your on-premises Active Directory than there is with ADFS and pass-through.
Awesome. So when would you recommend pass-through authentication to someone over, say, hash?
So just by projects that I've done and the way I see things moving forward, I think pass-through authentication should be the way to go by. Should be the main one to go with, and the reason is because with password hash, like I said, you're only really getting the benefit of single sign-on and using the same password. There's still, again, I'm talking from a small to medium business aspect, because that's what my past is. Those are my customers at the moment. What you find is a lot of them have so much investment on premises. They'll have a lot of they'll use group policy a lot and to manage their devices. And this whole cloud journey, they just don't want to jump into it all at once. They want to do it bit by bit. The first part's identity management. So for them to still be able to utilize stuff like group policy and their security policies that they've put in place and spent time and effort and money on, still being able to utilize those using the password hash, pass-through authentication, and still being able to then utilize stuff like Office 365 and SharePoint using those same policies is a massive benefit to them. And it's quite a good selling point as well from just trying to get people into 365 and SharePoint and stuff like that.
Yeah, because that's the thing, is it works. Obviously, if you're on Office 365, which a lot of organizations are, it's a great service. Obviously, like that, you need this, because I remember implementing ADFS for the first time probably back in 2013, I think it was.
Yeah.
And it was like, I remember setting it up, and but obviously that was the thing. Like that was still fairly new then. Because to be honest, it's funny. Like the reason I moved it over was because I just get fed up and getting up in we had an Australian office, and then I was the person on call, or the mobile number. I was the one that the Australian team had their mobile number, so when I wasn't technically on call, I get like exchanges broken again. Like it was running on old hardware, and I was just like, and eventually I was just like, please, can we go Office 365? Because it was like, you can only fix Exchange so many times before you just get a little bit grumpy with, and when Exchange goes down, it doesn't. It's not like it's just a little bit down. It's like it's either up or it's in a heap. But that's a discussion for another time.
I think. Sorry. I think before. I think ADFS was probably when Office 365 was in its infancy. ADFS was the way to do the to have that single sign-on feature. Password hash and Azure AD Connect weren't. I don't think they were there yet. So very early doors, ADFS was the way to, because that's how you would, if you had like a cloud app, or you'd integrate with ADFS, and then SAML came in and Azure AD and all that sort of stuff. So ADFS has been there for donkeys, and that's what I think a lot of the first when Office 365 was in its infancy, that was the way to get the hybrid identity management through ADFS.
Yeah, it's funny though. ADFS. Do you know one thing is I love it because I recently set it up for I think it was at a security webinar. So I spent some time setting up ADFS using MSDNs and all that sort of good stuff. It's still, I mean, what I would say is it can still be a little bit frustrating. Like the AD Connect, very easy to set up. ADFS is still, it's not a great experience, like when you, like for instance, when you're switching out like a certificate, I always found that I had to write down the document. It was not necessarily straightforward to do something.
For me, it's about weighing up the risks. And when I'm trying to, when I've got a customer problem in front of me, and I'm trying to think of a solution, it's trying to weigh up the risk when you've got several options in front of you. This is the same thing. You've got 3 different options around how to do password synchronization. And it's about weighing up the risk of each one. For me, ADFS comes with a much higher risk. You've got more of an on-premises footprint. More things can go wrong. If your proxy server fails, that's gonna cause issues. Certificates, which is what you just mentioned, if they expire and someone's missed the date for it, you're screwed. And same with there's more things that could go wrong with ADFS, in my opinion, which is why I try and steer people towards either password hash or pass-through authentication.
Yeah, it is. It's generally a little bit easier. I've got an ADFS box here. I thought I'd spin it up and see what it's doing, but it's taking its sweet time. But yeah, it is both. So there's lots of options. You've got that pass-through, so you can put these in front of your security team, because that's the main thing, really. Get in front of security and seeing what they think and what they come back with. I am going to give up with that. But yeah, I thought that'd be cool, but apparently not. And yeah, so yeah, obviously, so there's a few things here. So you've got a few here, and obviously, you have a blog about this. So you're imitgeek.com.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously, by all means, I'll include this in the video. So if you do come back and have a look at it later, you should see it in the YouTube link. So next up then, Shabaz, tell us a little bit about Azure Active Directory Domain Services.
Yeah, sure. So this is probably out of the 3 topics that we've kind of touched on, the Azure AD, Azure Hybrid, and this is probably the newest service as far as identity management goes. So this is probably this is what I'd refer to this as, it's a domain controller as a service. So there's always been that element to be able to put a domain controller in Azure as a virtual machine. But what this is, Azure AD Domain Services, is basically the service of a domain controller. So you don't need to roll up VMs or do the DC promo. This is the service version of that, and it comes with all the kind of the similar features as Active Directory on premises. So we touched on earlier about Azure AD. You can't domain join machines. You can with Azure Domain Services. So this is where you go back to the Kerberos and NTLM authentication. Azure AD Domain Services has that. So you can, if you've got infrastructure in Azure, Windows machines and other sort of devices that you may join, you would join them to this domain. Now, there are a few different ways, I suppose, you could have this. You could have it where it's in a kind of hybrid format, so it's almost an extension of your on-premises domain, or you can have it just on its own. So if you're fully cloud managed, your infrastructure, and you've got your virtual machines in there as well as Microsoft 365 and whatnot, you essentially have this Azure AD Domain Services, and you join your your VMs to this. So your network, your VNet, its DNS IP addresses point to Azure. So when you try and domain join a machine, it can see the domain. With regard to integration with Azure AD, they do have that as well. So once you provision Azure AD domain services, if you've got cloud Azure AD accounts, all you need to do is update your password, because at this point, before you've created your Azure AD domain services tenancy, let's call it, your Azure AD accounts are still in that password hash format. Once you've created your Azure AD domain services and Azure AD can see it, it still won't be able to integrate with it until you update the password, because then rather than updating it as a password hash, it updates it to like the Kerberos NTLM. I can't say that too fast. NTLM authentication, and that's where you're able to log into Windows VMs that are joined to the Azure domain services. You can log in with your Azure AD accounts then, because once you've changed that password, it's created that link between the two. But until you change your password, you won't be able to log into any resources that are joined to that domain.
So is this a fairly new product by Microsoft then for that?
It's the newest, yeah. So as far as the identity management piece goes, so yeah, I think it's probably 18 months or so, I think, maybe.
Yeah.
It's yeah, it is, and I'm seeing a lot of people who are integrating it with Windows Virtual Desktop.
Right.
It's doing quite well with that. Most customers are having a Azure AD domain services tenant along with their, to join their Windows Virtual Desktop VMs too. And other people are going for the hybrid approach but again, there's so with having a VPN to the main point. But sorry, I want to go back one step to get the hybrid element of it, where I mentioned that you could have the Azure AD domain service as an extension to your on-premises domain. You do need a VPN, a site-to-site VPN.
Right.
Sorry, go on.
Do you also does it work with ExpressRoute as well?
Sorry, yes, it does work with ExpressRoute. Some sort of connection back to your on-premises network, so the domain controls can see each other essentially.
Right.
So probably wherever the NHS project that I did back in April, right at the beginning of COVID, that is it, where it's the hybrid element. So they've got a VPN between their on-premises and Azure, and then they've kind of extended their domain using Azure AD domain services. Right. It's like having a domain control in the cloud essentially. So it's the I suppose the authentication doesn't have to travel through the VPN. They have that local domain control essentially service that they can that they can authenticate to.
It's kind of like what they've done with SQL as well, where you used to have SQL VMs and then you had Azure SQL, and those were kind of saw as two separate products. Now they're kind of like Azure SQL is, you've got three now. What you've got there is a managed SQL instance on a VM, but Microsoft do most of the heavy lifting. So it's similar to that, which is good. And it's funny because obviously hearing things like NTLM and Kerberos and these authentication protocols have been around for
donkeys,
25 years, if not longer.
Exactly.
There's not been many things which have really changed about them over the years. So yeah, it's
there are, again, with the Azure AD domain services, that, like most things, there's different tiers to it. So I think you've got the basic tier, which gives you, again, it's all based around how many accounts you can have within your tenant. I think there's basic, standard, and premium potentially, or I'm sorry, they might call it enterprise rather than premium. Sorry. So there's different let's call them licensing tiers, and obviously the basic one is I think is free. Then the standard and the enterprise is where it will probably cost you a bit. I think, or is it? It might even be 80 quid a month. I think might be the standard or the basic. I can't remember, but there is a cost element to it.
Yeah, to be fair, that's what you would pay for a virtual machine just running a single domain controller.
Exactly.
Anyway.
I think it's very reasonable. It's not a hard conversation to have with customers. I've been having a lot of Windows Virtual Desktop conversations with customers, and the Azure AD services is very easy to kind of to discuss with them, and the benefits around it.
Yeah, there's lots of great apps, and that's it. There's lots of great use cases, and to be honest, you see there that you've got 3,500 security experts.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like when you're working on that sort of stuff, it really has, and always, and that's something actually. Just on a side note, is Azure has more compliance certifications than any other cloud service provider. I remember that year. I mean, I used to live in Australia, and I got into Azure back in 2000, and I played with it in 2013, and then I moved to it entirely in 2014. I moved over to Australia to start up a technical services or a hosting company. I went over there to start that off in the Australian part of the business.
Right.
And it is funny because like compliance is something that's always been very big. It's like, they're very much into that. So you've got all the ISO, all all the US, because obviously the US ones as well. There's lots there. But yeah,
Yeah. I mean, I've been lucky enough in where I'm currently working at Concord Technology Group. I've been lucky enough to do projects where I've used all three of these different identity management. So
right.
back in November, migrated a customer they were hosted with a third party. We migrated them fully to cloud, so they went fully blown to Azure AD, Office 365, SharePoint Online, Intune managed devices, OneDrive, all the sort of fully cloud, and they've not looked back since. And then it's funny. I was talking to them the other day, and they were just like they couldn't have timed it better because they went there in November. COVID hit us in February, March time, and they're loving life at the moment because they said it's just so easy. We can work from anywhere.
Yeah.
And it's all built on Azure AD, Azure Identity Management.
Well, that's it. I mean, that's one of the, because it's funny. Like I mostly got into DevOps because I did use products like Office 365. Kind of like automating the mundane away, like moving, like I remember thinking Exchange was really interesting. And it is, right? But it's really interesting for other people now. That's where, like, I genuinely think I love being that, but it was like, messaging doesn't really float my boat, if I'm being honest, when it comes to it's. You get people who are very much into that kind of messaging, the link or Skype for business, or
Yeah.
it's been a few years since I've done that, but yeah, it is, and obviously that's where cloud really enables you to kind of jump in and do more interesting stuff.
Exactly. I mean, if you look at all these things we've mentioned infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service, DevOps, messaging. They all need identity management. You can't get away from it. So that's why the topics that we're discussing today. Anyone who is in IT and wants to do Azure needs to know, in my own opinion, needs to know the basic elements of identity management and what it entails. Because it's any aspect, all uses it, so it's quite important.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, because like it's funny. It reminds me a little bit of networking, in that it's not something that you think about a lot, but it's absolutely central to without a form of a way to authenticate, people can't prove who they are. If they can't prove who they are, then they can't get access to resources. So identity is really one of the core services that really makes the web and work and all that sort of good stuff operate.
100%.
Yeah. So obviously, we're getting towards the end of the day, unfortunately, Shabazz. But
That's
what I
flown
was
by.
thinking was, what sort? I mean, I'm a huge fan of Microsoft Learn. So if you do want to learn about Azure Active Directory, then jump on to docs.microsoft, and then learn. Definitely check this out. Obviously, you can search. There's lots and lots of great content out here. Obviously, you can use it for Azure users and groups, etc. That same concept still exists. You still embed users into groups and then assign permissions to groups. Are there any other resources out there that you can recommend to people viewing?
I suppose from a free perspective, obviously Microsoft Learn is amazing. I'm not sure really, because then there's obviously there's courses on places like Pluralsight and the other one, which is Whiz Labs. I think there's a couple more as well. But no, I think I've done a couple of different. I said I've got a blog on identity management, but I've got I've got another blog as well around the different types of hybrid we can do, like device exchange and identity management as well. So this one's all around identity management. There's another blog that I've got that's more around hybrid for anyone wanting to, if you are on premises and wanting to know what else you can do. So that second one down, I think, goes on a bit. And again, the premise of it all is identity management. If I want to say the without the identity management, you can't do any of device hybrid, exchange hybrid, anything like that. So
nice. It looks really good. Obviously, please check out Shabaz. He's IamITgeek.com. And Shabaz, you're Shabaz Dar on Twitter as well.
Yeah, at Shabaz Dar. Yeah, I try to be active. Again, I'm hoping to do a lot more stuff within the community with my new role, because I'm just have more exposure to Azure. So I'm looking forward to the coming months. Thank you for having me as well on the show. Really appreciate it. It's been fun.
No worries at all. It was a pleasure having you. Learned a bunch. I've got my architect exam, so hopefully what you're talking about will help me as well. But yeah, obviously check out the blog. If you're keen to know more about pass-through authentication versus password hash, etc., jump on, use ADFS. You can set all this up for free. And also on the Azure portal, most of what you can do with Azure Active Directory is also free. Okay, so that's it, unfortunately, for this week's version of DevOps Derek Weekly. Shabaz, it's been a pleasure. Everybody else, thank you very much for joining. Have a great evening, and I will see you next week. Next week, I have a session lined up with, let's just double check. So next Monday at 6 o'clock, I will have Ivan Kiljak. We're going to be talking about Azure functions, durable functions, all of the functions. So join same time next week, same bat time, same bat channel, and everybody have a great evening. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.